You have been alive for roughly 20 to 40 years. In that time, your brain has generated approximately 86 billion neurons worth of thoughts, feelings, and experiences. Neuroscience, right now, in 2026, cannot explain how it does any of that. At all. Not we haven't mapped it fully yet. Not give us 10 more years. Fundamental, embarrassing, scientists who have won Nobel Prizes for studying brains levels of dot cannot explain it. The specific thing they cannot explain is this. Why does thinking feel like something? Not the processing. The processing they have mapped extensively. The experience. The what it is like to be you, right now, reading this sentence. Today, the hard problem of consciousness. Two competing theories. An international experiment that tested both and resolved absolutely nothing. A very famous neuroscientist who now thinks your brain doesn't generate your thoughts at all, and what any of this means. In simple terms, to be fair to neuroscience, it has solved most of the problems. How the brain processes vision, mapped. How memory forms and consolidates during sleep, mapped. How decisions get made, how emotions get regulated, how language gets processed, mapped. Mapped. Reasonably mapped. The brain is not especially mysterious in these areas. In 1995, philosopher David Chalmers gave a name to the one problem neuroscience genuinely cannot solve. He called it the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems are, how does the brain do things? The hard problem is, why does any of it feel like anything? When you see red, your brain processes photons at roughly 700 nanometers. We can measure that. We can simulate it. We can build a machine that responds to those wavelengths perfectly. But why is there a subjective experience of redness? Why is there something it feels like to see red? If you built a robot with identical processing, would it experience red? Science has no way to tell. This is the gap. This gap has a name. The explanatory gap. It has been open since at least 1995. No amount of fMRI data, no electrode recording, no neural mapping closes it. You can describe every neuron that fires when someone sees red. You still cannot explain why it feels like anything, rather than running quietly in the dark with no inner life at all. Two major theories tried to bridge this gap. First, integrated information theory, proposed by Giulio Tononi, supported by Christof Koch, arguably the most famous neuroscientist alive, who spent 30 years studying consciousness with Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA. IIT says, consciousness is integrated information. Any system that integrates information in a non-reducible way has some degree of experience. IIT gives consciousness a number, phi. High phi equals more consciousness. Humans have enormous phi. Worms have modest phi. A single logic gate has almost none. But, and here is the part that makes people uncomfortable, a thermostat has a tiny amount of phi. A thermostat might be, infinitesimally, slightly conscious. IIT does not apologize for this. Second theory, global workspace theory. Proposed by Bernard Bars, developed further by Stanislas Dehaene. More intuitive. Most brain processing happens in local modules simultaneously, quietly, outside awareness. Occasionally, certain information gets broadcast globally, amplified and shared across the whole brain. That broadcast is consciousness. It is the spotlight on a dark stage. Global workspace theory is what most working neuroscientists prefer. It makes better predictions. It is more testable. It does not require thermostats to be sentient. But it shares the same fatal flaw as every other theory. It still cannot explain why the broadcast produces experience. The broadcast could, in principle, run in the dark. The hard problem remains. In 2023, an international group of neuroscientists ran what they called an adversarial collaboration, the Cogedite study. Both theory teams jointly designed the experiments, agreed on the predictions, and ran everything together. The results, IIT was partly right. Global workspace was partly right. Both theories were also partly wrong. The study introduced as many new questions as it answered. Science, clarity, resolution, etc. What Cogitate actually demonstrated is that the hard problem might not be solvable within either existing framework. Something fundamentally different is needed. And that is where the story gets genuinely strange. Christof Koch spent 30 years hunting the neural correlates of consciousness, the patterns in the brain that correspond to being aware. He found many correlates. What he didn't find, what nobody has found, is an explanation for why those correlates produce felt experience rather than just running as information, silently, with nothing it is like from the inside. After 30 years, Koch changed his question. In April 2026, this month, Koch published a direct challenge to neuroscience's central assumption. The assumption is, the brain produces consciousness. Koch's argument, that might be wrong. The question, how does the brain generate experiences might be the wrong question entirely. The brain might not be a generator, it might be a receiver. This is older than it sounds. William James, the father of American psychology, proposed a transmissive model of brain function in 1898. The brain, James argued, does not produce thought any more than a prism produces light. A prism filters and separates light that already exists. The brain might filter and express consciousness that already exists. In this model, consciousness is fundamental, a basic property of reality, like mass or electric charge. It doesn't emerge from complex neural firing. It exists at the lowest level of everything. When neurons activate, they are not generating experience from scratch. They are tuning into experience that is already present. Your brain is less of a factory and more of an antenna. The formal version of this view is called panpsychism. The idea that consciousness, in some minimal, proto-form, is present in everything. Not that rocks are writing poetry or quarks have opinions, but that the raw ingredient experience is made of exists throughout the fabric of reality. Panpsychism sounds like science fiction until you consider what the alternative requires. The mainstream view requires you to explain how your inner life, the felt sense of existing right now, somehow emerges from neurons that have no inner life, from chemistry that experiences nothing by itself. Panpsychism doesn't require that leap. It says consciousness doesn't emerge from matter. Consciousness and matter are both expressions of the same underlying thing. In February 2026, MIT unveiled a new non-invasive tool, transcranial focused ultrasound. It can precisely stimulate deep brain regions that were previously unreachable, specifically, the regions most associated with consciousness. The research goal: test whether consciousness is produced locally by those regions, or whether the brain is doing something more like modulating a signal. The results are not in yet. But this is the first tool that makes the question experimentally testable at this depth. Within the next decade, we will have actual data, not just correlates, on what the brain is doing with consciousness, whether it is the source or the instrument. Here is the implication that makes this strange. If consciousness is fundamental, if it is more like a field that pervades reality, then your thoughts may not originate in your brain. Your brain may be selecting, filtering, and expressing experiences that exist at a deeper level of reality. The thought isn't generated by the neuron. The neuron is where the thought surfaces. This would dissolve the hard problem. If consciousness is fundamental, there is no need to explain how chemistry becomes experience. Experience is already there. The question stops being how does matter become mind and becomes how does mind express itself through matter. Chalmers' gap closes, not by filling it, but by realizing it was in the wrong place. We do not know if any of this is true. Neither does Christof Koch. Neither does MIT. But in 2026, the world's most serious neuroscientists are openly asking, maybe the brain doesn't make consciousness, maybe it receives it. And if you ask most neuroscientists where your thoughts actually come from, the honest answer is still, nobody knows.